morning and welcome to my video. I am so excited to finally talk about sourdough. If you have followed me for a while, you will know that over a year and a half ago I started baking with sourdough, and I had many requests from you to show you how to make what I had been making, and I kept referring you to other resources until one of you said, "No, Julie, you can be a great resource." And my sister Bonnie said, when the day comes that I want to bake sourdough, I don't want to learn from other people, I want to learn from you. So thank you for all of the support. It really does mean a lot. Before we do any tutorial videos, I thought it was important to talk about what sourdough is, why we want to use it, and the benefits of using sourdough. If you are anything like me, when you hear the word sourdough, when I first heard the word sourdough, I envisioned in my mind a pioneer woman with a hard, crusty loaf of bread, living on a homestead, homeschooling her kids. That's not true. That's none of that. It is good, wholesome bread that is good for your body. What is sourdough? This is my starter. This is nothing but flour and water mixed together, and it has had the time to ferment into good bacteria. It gets the bacteria from your environment, the air, it takes it from the flour, kind of a combination of both. And it has fermented, and this is a mature starter. A mature starter is one that is, I would say, you can start using this for your bread when it's around 2 weeks old, but a good couple months, you have a good mature starter. And that's a whole nother topic that can be discussed later. This is what leavens your bread. This is what rises your bread. This is what you would call a traditional yeast. This right here is called a conventional yeast. This also leavens your bread and rises it, but in a much quicker way. If you choose to never bake with sourdough, I think that's totally fine. I grew up with homemade bread using this kind of yeast, and it was wonderful and it was fantastic. And I think if you can ditch the store-bought breads and even bake with this kind of yeast and have quick homemade bread, I think that is so much better for you than the store-bought bread that has preservatives and so many unhealthy ingredients in that loaf of bread. Whereas you can cook with literally flour, water, salt, either instant yeast or sourdough starter. Now, what can you cook with sourdough starter? Yes, you can cook the beautiful loaves of bread. This is the last piece that I have in the house right here because we go through it so quickly. I had one little piece left I could show you. I made some English muffins. We put ham and cheese and jam and butter on these English muffins. Banana chocolate chip muffins. I have a beautiful loaf of just basic sandwich dough bread rising that I will cook here later this afternoon. If I was using this kind of yeast, it would have taken an hour or two. This has taken all night and day, but the benefits are going to far outweigh than the instant yeast. And the hands-on time of baking with sourdough isn't that much if you think about it. A lot of it is planning ahead and letting it sit on your countertop for a long period of time, because when you are feeding your gut with fermented foods, that's so healing and so good for your body to have that fermentation. And that's what you get when you bake with sourdough, is that long fermented dough. So let's talk about some of the benefits. The first one is it's easy to digest. So because the bacteria and yeast are breaking down all of the starches in the grain before it even reaches your stomach, like that's what it's doing right here in this loaf right now. It's breaking down all of that gluten, making it a lot easier to digest. It also acts as a prebiotic. So the fiber in the bread also feeds the good bacteria in your intestines. Sourdough has a lower glycemic index. We talked about it being a fermented food, so it's already breaking down the starches in the grain. And so when you eat it, your blood glucose will kind of level out, whereas when you eat store-bought bread, your glucose will spike and then come back down. A lot of people who are gluten intolerant have found that they can actually have sourdough bread because the gluten has been broken down. If you're celiac, this is not the case. I don't believe you can have even sourdough bread because there is still gluten in it. It is not gluten-free. I know there are ways you can make it, but I don't know anything about it. But if you are gluten intolerant, you may be able to have a sourdough bread, especially one that has been fermented for a really long time where the gluten has been broken down already. There's different ways to make sourdough bread. You can make it quicker, but I think the longer time, and that's like a whole nother topic too, but the longer you ferment on the countertop, the gluten sensitivity people may be able to tolerate a little bit of it, is what I have heard. Another health benefit is having more good acid in the sourdough. And I'm going to read my notes here so I don't mess up on my words, but lactobacillus is a kind of bacteria found in sourdough bread more than other types of bread, and it results in higher levels of lactic acid. That's important because it means there is less room for the phytic acid, which can be dangerous. Larger quantities of lactic acid also result in easier digestion and allows your body to absorb nutrients easier. Side note, I have been listening to several podcasts and learning more about gut health, and I'm learning how the acid in your stomach is so important, and it's important to have good acid in your stomach to be able to break down your food. And so reading this and just connecting all the things that I am learning, it's all making sense, and it's amazing how our bodies work. The healthy bacteria in sourdough bread reduces the yeast population, so the likelihood of infection can be a lot lower. I mentioned this earlier where sourdough bread contains no preservatives in it. During the fermentation process, you develop acetic acid, which naturally prevents the growth of mold. Now, I will say, if I have a loaf of sourdough bread and a loaf of store-bought bread, within a day or two, the sourdough bread will feel drier, a little bit more dense, and the store-bought bread is still really soft and squishy and airy, because of all of the preservatives. But you don't want to eat preservatives. They're not good for you. We go through our sourdough bread quick enough. You can pop it in the freezer if you're not going to go through it quick enough. Sourdough bread is a lot more nutritious for you. It does contain many vitamins and nutrients and folate, magnesium, B vitamins, all of that great stuff is found in sourdough bread, whereas the other types of breads, all of the good nutrients are processed out of it. Another big benefit of baking with sourdough is the flavor. There is more flavor to homemade sourdough bread than there is store-bought bread. And a lot of you may be deterred from the word sourdough because there is maybe a little bit more of a sour flavor, and maybe a lot of people don't like that flavor. But you can actually control how sour you want your loaf of bread to taste. So for instance, if I wanted a really sour flavor and that tang to my bread, what I did with this loaf is do a small amount of starter. Now this might sound opposite, but trust me here. You would use a smaller amount of starter, and that would mean that you would need a longer period of time for that small amount of starter to eat through all of that flour. And so it ferments for a long period of time. You have a stronger flavor. But if you don't want that strong flavor, then add a larger amount of starter to your flour, and then it only needs to eat through that flour a lot quicker. So then you have a shorter amount of time, and your dough or your bread will not have fermented as long, so it's not going to be as strong of a flavor. There's a few more ways that you can control the flavor, but that was just one example. Now, I think baking with sourdough is a fun process. It's become more of a hobby to me than anything that my family gets to benefit from, but one of my favorite things of baking with sourdough is watching the texture of the dough change. It starts out with this really sticky, shaggy, doughy mess, and as time evolves and as you do a few techniques, you got this beautiful, soft, airy, bubbly dough, and I just love being able to see that transition and then turn it into something like this or this, and it's just a lot of fun. Now you're wondering, well, how do I get a starter, Julie? Well, you can make your own, which I mean, unless you're dead set on making your own, yeah, go for it. My sister Illy actually wants to make her own, and I told her, give me all the tips because I don't know how to do it. There can be a lot of trial and error. You might go through a lot of flour. I got this from a really good friend of mine. It was about 2 years old when I got it. You can buy starters off Etsy. The King Arthur website is a great resource. You can even go to a local bakery, and more times than not, they will give you a little bit. And all you need is just a few tablespoons of starter. Another great resource is jumping on the Facebook pages, like a sourdough starter Facebook page. There's lots of them. You just type in sourdough on Facebook, join a Facebook group, and a lot of times you can ask a question in there, and there might be someone local to you that is willing to give you some as well. But most people who bake with sourdough are more than generous, more than happy to give you some of their starter. Just ask around, or you can make one. And I know that is possible, I just haven't done it. So one thing that I would note with that is I have seen people say, I spent extra money and I got this over 200-year-old starter that was from the Oregon Trail. And while that's like cool to say and all, I don't know how much to believe that, to be honest. And once you bring a starter into your own environment and you feed it a couple times, like 4 times, you're introducing this to your bacteria in your house, your own flour, your own air, and it completely changes it. It's a different starter than it was 4 days ago. So, I mean, although it originated from maybe the Oregon Trail or whatever you find out there, it's going to be a different starter once you've used it a few times. So I wouldn't spend more for anything cool like that, but that's just me personally. Lastly, this is a live culture. This is something I feed and take care of and keep alive. And so most people who have a starter also have a name for theirs, and her name is Darla. So say hello to Darla. And if you have a starter, go ahead and comment down below what your starter's name is, how you got into sourdough. 2 or 3 years ago, I had a friend of mine teach a church group how to bake sourdough bread. And I remember thinking in my mind, no, that's too complicated. I will never do that. I'm not gonna do that. And here I am baking with Darla. This is something I enjoy doing, and I plan on making more videos all about sourdough and the beautiful food items that I can bake with it. So thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you guys in the next one.